Edberg pulls up for three. Boom, knocks it down.
Curry from the corner at Bray, puts it in.
For overtime, makes it Garrett. Right.
Welcome to the MVP cast from me, Mark Woods. My guest, now one of the longest established coaches in the whole British Basketball League. He's from Africa originally, but he's made his home in the leafy climes of Guildford, first generating some heat and now lighting up the Surrey Scorchers. He is, of course, their head coach, Creon Raftopoulos, and welcome to the MVP cast.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you having me.
Early in the season, but let's start maybe by looking back, because you have a very unusual background for this country, of course, originally from Zimbabwe, and growing up over there, what was the country? What sort of state was the country in your youth and the time there? Because we've seen recently the death of Robert Mugabe, the turmoil, the trauma that caused, but also changes after independence from the UK and the evolution of Zimbabwe coming out of Rhodesia. But what was the Zimbabwe/Rhodesia that you remember?
Well, for me, Mark, to be honest with you, I think I had probably a really good childhood. We gained independence in 1980. At that point I was 6 years old, and I can only remember good times. From that point moving on, and schools were really good. The discipline was really good. We got really good education, and then I think moving on close to getting to about the 2000s. Was when things kind of like started changing for me, and that's when I had to make a decision that was actually based around what was going to be best for my son Kalen, and because of that, those changes is why I obviously made the move to the United Kingdom.
And those changes being what?
I just felt that it was kind of like weird for me in the sense that. We grew up as in Zimbabwe. There's a word that everybody kind of like looks at is known as being inappropriate. Because so we were kind of known as the colored community, all right, and that was not by choice or anything. That was what we were known as. So we weren't black, and we weren't white. We were colored, and so whereas my father and my parents grew up in a time that was white rule. They had to deal with obviously apartheid things and stuff that happened during their time. And that's why I said when we gained independence in 1980, I think it was pretty much a different type of country and pretty fair on all of us. So things seemed very, very, really, really smooth. From a sporting point of view, for me personally, things were changing in the world of basketball. So basketball first was predominantly white teams when my parents played. And then it went through a phase where it was a lot of what would be called colored teams or mixed race teams. And then following off of the mixed race teams, it became a lot of what was known as African black teams. And there was a minority of colored people playing basketball. It was at that point, even though I was representing my country, I realized that I was one of only a few left playing for the country. And I looked at what was going to happen in the future if there would be any more so-called colored people picked to represent the country. And that was what kind of like drove me into making my decision, because my son was very sporty.
Because it must have been a very emotionally a wrench, because you were captain of the national team at one point.
Yes, it was difficult. I still take a lot of pride in my achievements with Zimbabwe as a player. Being a co-captain and being a senior member of the team was always very, very something I was very proud of. But as I said, the emotions that we went through in order to get to the points that we were at times you would just want to walk away from the game. And I think that's why coming to England was actually a savior for me, because I think if I had remained in Zimbabwe, I probably wouldn't have carried on with the game as much as I loved the game. So yeah, it did take a lot out of us, but coming to England kind of re-energized me, and helped me fulfill, my basketball dreams.
When you going before that, I mean, your father, as I understand it, was the first or one of the first black players ever to play for Rhodesia, and then was involved in the game afterwards. I mean, how much did you appreciate the significance of what he did?
It's crazy that you should ask that, Mark, because I've probably learned a lot more later, in what's happened in the country, for example, over the years, after Mugabe was no longer president and so forth. There's some stories that were just basically probably untold. And in time, I've been a little bit more curious on what it was like for them growing up, and you hear the stories, and it's kind of like really eye-opening, and like, wow, that's what they went through, and so I take a lot of pride in what my father stood for. He was very respected within the community, him and my mother, and they opened the door for a lot of people to play basketball, them and other people, but they remain probably two of the highly respected people that were involved in basketball. So looking back at what he went through, and then I was kind of like went through a patch where I was like, you know what, this is getting tougher and tougher for me. I just wanted something better for my child, and that's why leaving hurt, it hurts today. I lost amazing time with my parents. While I was here coaching, I lost my mom. While I was here coaching, I lost my dad. So yeah, it's I'm probably living my dream, but it's also living my dream and following my parents' wishes has also left a lot of doubts in my mind on, did I make the right decision in giving up all that time?
How much did he tell you about that evolution to becoming the first player? Because obviously before, I'm guessing there must have been a point that he wasn't allowed to play, and then he was, and then he had to make that leap. And that's, we've seen other players in, Jackie Robinson, or we've seen players coming into the South African rugby cricket teams at some point. But I mean, it must be emotionally, mentally, have been a very tough passage for him.
Yeah, from the stories that in the times that we did get to speak about it and speak about the different challenges that he went through, and other players also, he just at the point, I think, had reached a point where because he was so good, he was even more high profile, and so looking over pictures and seeing him, as sometimes being, the only non-white on the team and stuff, would obviously make me be like, wow, you must have been good, to get in with those guys and so forth. But he'd tell me the stories about the changing rooms, and traveling to places to play where people would come and watch, and he probably wouldn't be, the restaurant wouldn't be a restaurant that he's allowed to go into, and so forth, So during my time, at different times, as I said, we were shielded from that stuff, but you've eventually heard about some of the stuff that would go on, and that's what kind of like built me in my way not to hold things against people, because right up until my father's last days, he was respected and also loved by, and had good friends that were kind of like considered colored, mixed race, white, Indian or black African. So the fact that he could overlook that I always found that really amazing after some of the things that as a country the community had gone through.
I mean, your mother Juliet played for Rhodesia as well, and she coached the women's national team. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I mean, basketball-wise, what was that like, having two parents who were clearly very rooted in this sport?
I think it's kind of like helped me in where I am now. My wife has to put up with everything that I do. I mean, every single Christmas now, we've got the 3 import players plus extras that spend Christmas with us, because obviously they can't fly home. So coming from that background where my parents felt that having a barbecue at the house after a game, and everybody being in a specific environment or specific place meant they weren't doing silly stuff, So I grew up in that. The funny part of it is we were my brother and I with their two kids, but there was a whole lot of other people in the house that we kind of like shared our home with, and so growing up that way, I kind of like molded me into what I am today in the sense that I'm very team first oriented, and I'm very about helping people as human beings, and then the basketball will come along with that. So being in that house, there's a lot of pride for what they achieved, Mark, but in the same token, now at my age, I kind of like see the bigger picture of what they were doing.
Is it curious when you are able to go back now? Because it's a country that's changed so much since you left. It was, I guess, a place that it seems that you had sort of mixed feelings about when you left. I mean, how do you fit easily into there when you go back these days?
It's heartbreaking, you know. The trips that I did go back for, Mark, sometimes are really bad ones. It's I don't think there's anything worse than like being jumping on a plane and you go spend the Christmas with your family, and when you're jumping back on the plane to come back to your life in England, you don't know if that's the last time you're going to hug your parents. You know, I know I'm not the only person from Zimbabwe that's had to go through that type of thing, but having experienced it, it's totally one of the worst things ever. So going home becomes really tough. A lot of my friends, my teammates from the past, all still live back home. We keep in constant contact, and they're always forever telling us about the struggles that they have. But it becomes such a big struggle that sometimes they don't even want to talk about it. They just have to get on with it. Um, so I can't imagine how tough that life is, not having electricity for hours and hours and hours, or not having running water, and you know, um, and that's why I think when we over here and a basketball player complains that the gym is a little cold, I kind of like have to pull him aside and say, "Hey, listen, mate, this might be a little cold, but somewhere in the world there's something worse happening. So it puts things in perspective. But going home, Mark, is always good, but it hurts as much as it is always good to see old family and friends. It does hurt to see what the country is from, like the good old days, as people would say.
How tough was it to, I guess, to observe what was happening from such a distance? Because obviously you can talk to people. You were able to talk to your parents for a long time about the country and the journey that it was going on. Obviously, we saw the pictures here, and it was a very, I guess, one-sided picture for a lot of the time about Mugabe's regime and everything that was going on. But was there points in time when you were like, I've always tried, how do I get people out, or how do I go back and help, or because I guess you can see the feeling of kind of helplessness in some respects, that you can't be there to support people on the ground.
Yeah, that was a constant thing. I mean, obviously, I'd collect from basketball players in England, sneakers and basketball equipment and so forth, and I'd send that back. But that was kind of like to help people have fun. You know, that still wasn't going to feed somebody or help put stuff on the shelves. And the country went through some through phases. People always talk about the inflation and how there were $1 billion notes and so forth. I remember walking into a supermarket with my dad, and the lady said to me the total was 180,000, and I just went into panic mode because I was like, I'm in a supermarket and I'm about to pay 180,000, and then my dad kind of like said, no, just it's just that big or the big red note and this note, and I was like, oh, okay. So the fact that people had to go through that, like, and coming back home, it was a constant fight with. And when I say a constant fight, it was a constant thing with my parents, because there were things they loved about the country that they just didn't want to leave, you know. And so no matter how much we kind of like pleaded with them to come here, they were like, no, that's our home. And I think a lot of families from Zimbabwe have had to deal with that, where the older folk are settled, they own their houses, and they're not ready to come out of retirement and come to experience the British lifestyle.
And when your father came in, he was the commissioner of the league in Zimbabwe. I mean, was there ever an appeal to you emotionally to go back at any point in play, or once you'd come over here? I know obviously you had injuries, but was it ever something you thought, I'd quite like to be involved in that? Or I guess with a lot of people, you'd settled and made this life and it felt like the better option for Kaylin and the family?
I had constant contact with, as I said, a lot of some friends that stayed involved in the game. I did get a lot of contacts with regard to, you know, offers to coach the national team. And, I wanted to do a lot of that, Mark, but at the time it was kind of like on a voluntary basis. And starting off my career year, I wasn't in that financial position to kind of like say, okay, I can sacrifice 2 months of wages to go and help the national team. So those opportunities did come in the future. Would I love to do that? Yes, that's definitely something on my to-do list, is to coach my national team and try and make a difference with the national team. But with all of this here comes, it takes money. We know in the British game, we get small little pots of it. So it's very difficult for me to kind of like balance how I get money to run a business this end and then also try and get money to help my country's basketball association and stuff. But I watched my parents do it. I watched past executives who did a great job, look after the country. And the fact that it's still got a league running, is really a positive.
You come over here, 2001, and you get I understand really it's what you call a trial at Teesside Mohawks. And then it doesn't quite go to plan. Tell me what happened.
So what's that? 2001. I'm about to turn, turn 27. I feel I'm in my prime. I've had some good games with our national team, and I was originally in contact with I think it was Rick Taylor of from
Towers.
the Towers, and funny enough, it might have been Nick Nurse also, who was with Birmingham at the time or somewhere. But I came a little too early, and I had a little bit of time to spend. And a kid I had coached put me in contact with Tony Hansen, late Tony Hansen. And Tony heard about me and said, "Why don't you come up here?" So I go up to Teesside, play in this basketball game. And, I'm having fun. I know my players laugh at me now because I always tell them how I used to jump and dunk and stuff. It might not look like it, but, and I'm feeling all athletic, doing all that stuff. And then we start playing a game, just a little exhibition game. And a very good friend of mine, Paul Douglas, better known as Dougie in England circles. I kind of like stripped him, and Dougie came to try and win the ball back and then bumped me just slightly. And I felt a little something went in my knee. Thought it was nothing major, but it turned out that I think I'd done my meniscus. So the plan was to go back to Zimbabwe, get it seen to, and then restart that journey. But Tony Hansen convinced me to come back to Teesside because I'd got injured there, so that he could help me with my rehabilitation. Spoke to my mom. She felt that I should take the offer, and that's how I ended up in Teesside. Being in Teesside, Mark, I was around British players, I was around American players, some very good players also. The one thing that stuck out, though, was the entitlement. Everybody was, wanted this and was owed this and needed this. And it was more complaints than appreciation for what they had. And I'm a guy from Zimbabwe who played most of my career outdoors. If it was raining, we sometimes would play for as long as we could in the rain. But then they'd be like, okay, guys, this is dangerous. You could get struck by lightning, so you better get off the basketball court. And that's why I always say to guys, when guys do bring up the fact of, the court's too cold or the court's like this, it's like, man, I played in worse conditions. So when being around the guys, I kind of woke up one morning and didn't want to work out. And I felt that, okay, maybe this is the end of the road, but I felt that I had something to give. And so coaching at the basketball academy with Dougie, I found that, okay, you know what, I can help these kids appreciate what they have. And that became my basketball coaching journey within England, was because I wanted these kids that were up and coming to appreciate their opportunities. So I spent, not knowing it, I'd spend a lot of time mentoring them and telling them to appreciate what they have, and not complain about what they don't have, And obviously, one of the highlights of my time there was, that's where I met Kieran Achara, who was at our academy. So I spent a lot of talks with Kieran. Kieran babysat Kaylin for me a lot of times. And then my second son was actually named after Kieran through that coaching journey that started off in Teesside.
With that, I mean, you're at that academy, and obviously it was kids around, so 16, 17, 18, 19. How much did that prepare you for the pro game, or did it feel like a natural evolution to go into the pro game, or was the satisfaction enough there that you could have done without that next step?
To be honest with you, I was loving basketball. In Zimbabwe, we were at best semi-pro, we could never qualify for some of the bigger tournaments simply because it was all regionalized. So we had to get past Angola. Angola had a playing budget for the national team that was in the hundreds of thousands. Ours was sadly in the sense of we're going to be playing Angola soon, so we're going to have a week-long camp, and then you're going to go back and work, and then you're going to come back for another week-long camp, and you're going to go back and work. So the fact that I was now being paid to do something I loved was like, you know what, this is great. And at that point, I wasn't even thinking of professional levels and stuff, but Tony gave me that opportunity, being an assistant coach on a very successful Teesside basketball club, that had the likes of E.J. Harrison and Ralph Bucci, Jason Swain also played in the BBL. I was around those guys. So learning from them and picking up stuff helped to develop me as a coach for the next chapter.
When you went to Guildford Heat in 2010, I mean, at the time I recall, you were a bit of a left field choice for that. How did that particular job come about for you?
So that one came about. I had once again, the professionals had taken my love of the game away from me. Everybody was still needed so much money, and everybody needed this and that, and I was like, you know what, I can't help them, and I'd made the move to come back to be with my family in the South. A chance meeting with who I think was the Heat GM at the time, Ruth Fetz. She knew what I'd done, some of the work I'd done in Teesside, and so she spoke to me about coming to help the Heat as a basketball development director. And I said, okay, I'll have a chat with you. And that's where I met who was Heat owner at the time, Alan McLafferty. Started working with the Heat in doing that. I think that year, that the year that I was helping out, they had appointed Chad McKnight as the player coach. And they were going to be following the Newcastle model, which we all know was based on how brilliant Fab was. And I wanted to stay away from the pro game, so I said I'd help Chad from a distance, but I was not going to attend games or too many practices. Through that, things never worked out to plan with Chad, and then I got called in by Alan McLafferty, and he said he was doing changing things around. He needed me to find him a coach. I did my research. Reached out to the normal, the Steve Bucknell, I think it was Gary Stronach. There were a whole lot of coaches that were not being, that were not coaching at the time. And he spoke to them or interviewed them, and then he called me into the office one day and he said, right, Creon, I don't want any of those guys. And I said, okay, no problem. I think I got 2 more guys that you need to have a look at. And then Alan more or less basically said to me, no, I want you to coach the team. And I said, no, I'm sorry, Alan, I'm not doing this pro basketball anymore. And he said, well, look at it this way. You either have a job coach in the BBL team or you have no job at all. And that was when I'd said, oh, you know what? I'd love to coach the BBL team. And I got into it straight away from then, and I think I'd learned a lot from my time in Teesside. I'd also learned a lot from watching what was going on with other BBL clubs and what was going on at the Heat. And so when we spoke, I kind of spoke about what my vision would be for the club. And the most important thing for me as a club was, how do we get this club to be sustainable? And that's what this journey has been about, trying to create this sustainable club.
Let's just take a pause for one moment to tell you all about the British Basketball All-Stars Championship, which returns on Sunday, October the 13th. The venue, the Copper Box Arena in London, with 8 of the BBL's very best teams doing battle in this fantastic tournament, which will be live on Sky Sports. It features 12-minute games, an all-star 5-point line, and that golden buzzer power play. And the British Basketball All-Stars Championship promises to be a non-stop afternoon of fast-paced hoops action. Now, the tournament again showcasing the very best of British basketball talent. Surrey Scorchers out to defend the title they won 12 months ago. You really want to be there. You can get your tickets now. They're on sale with all the information available at allstarsbasketball.co.uk. Creon Raftopoulos is our guest on the MVP cast. You did very well in those early years at Guildford Heat. And then 2013, out of nowhere, you get the call saying your services are no longer required. And I remember speaking to you, I think, the following day, and you were in a state of shock. What went on in terms of that machinations of those sort of few hours when everything just changed?
That was tough. It was a tough time, Mark. We had a pretty solid season. I think that was the year I had the 3 Holmes guys, Travis and Chavez Holmes, Frank Holmes. We had Sam Crichelli, Albert Margai, Mattel Macklemore. We had a very good team, and I think we finished top 4 in the top 5 or top 4. And the talk had been about pushing on. We are now stable as a club financially, and we were going to be moving forward. And I just got called into a meeting to discuss the following season. By the then owner, Alison Reeve, and a friend of mine, Jack Majeski, was sitting in the room. And I'd worked with Jack a lot. My son had played for him and had helped Jack out with some of these future star stuff. So I was like, okay, what's going on here? And she just basically said to me, I've sold the club. And I said, oh, okay. I said, Jack, do you have a coaching job for me? Jack said, no. I said, okay, well then you don't need me. Thank you. And I walked out, and then the owner came running after me. And she said, I'm really, really sorry. And I'm like, look, I've had offers after the good season. And I think at the time, Durham had contacted me about their coaching job, coaching their team. And there's a couple of one team in Denmark that had contacted me. And I turned them down on the guidance, on speaking to Alison, the owner, to say, I'll be all good for next season. And then at the 11th hour, I was kind of like thrown to the side. While I was in shock, I had the part of the season has to go on, but I had 2 years left on my contract. And seeking lawyers' advice, I could have been the bad guy and insisted on the franchise can't change hands until I'm paid out. And don't ask me why, but I've never been one that's focused on the money. Rather than be that bad guy, I was kind of like, you know what, do what you want to do, pay me what you want to pay me. And so from what is a 2-year contract, I think I ended up getting a £3,000 payment. And that was kind of like, I was like, all right, you know what, that was a fun part of my journey. That's how life works. And, just started working on junior basketball and stuff, and live basketball TV, I think it was at the time, or the different broadcasting where the games have been broadcasted, asked me to be a guest with Dan in certain games, and that kind of like kept me in touch with what was going on. But it was really a hard one for me, Mark. You're flying high, you've had one of your best seasons, and then all of a sudden you kind of like, it all just crumbles around you, so that was one of the big down sides of my career.
Was there any resistance or reticence in your part when you got the call 2 years later asking you to come back, given obviously it was different ownership, but it's the same situation, the same, I guess, uncertainty that you always have in pro basketball? I mean, did you think twice about returning?
Definitely. I remember them speaking to me because I was doing a lot of community stuff of my own and happened to be in the sports park. And they spoke to, at the time, Gavin Baker spoke to me and said to me, it looks like, we're going to be going our own way, And I said, okay, oh wow, that's exciting, you know. And he's like, but you know, we interested in you. And I kind of like said to Gavin, well, you know, if you guys do part ways of Jack and it's official and so forth, then I'll be happy to sit down and talk to you, you know. And so they went through the formalities, and once that was cleared, I sat down with them. He mapped out what they wanted to do. I once again spoke about stability and saying, like, look, you need money to win, but we need to make the club stable. And once we've made the club stable and once we've grown the fan base again, maybe we'll be able to push on, you know. And Gavin kind of like trusted me with that. I think there was a CEO, Paul Blanchard, that was here when I had left, when the franchise changed. And so he called me in and said, look, Creon, you know, the way things went down in the past, they shouldn't have happened that way. So we just wanted to make sure you were in place before I left, because he was leaving at the time. So it felt right. I was excited about it. And, you know, I don't regret coming back into it because, as I said, you know, I love basketball, Mark. And, you know, I don't think there's anything better than being able to be on a basketball court regularly.
Yeah, Paul, a good guy. We once worked together for precisely 5 days at the NFL before he left. I don't think it was anything personal against me arriving. Yeah. No, our heads up Commonwealth Games, England. Looking at the team, let's look at this season. Obviously, lots of change, as happens with most summers. What was your process in terms of looking at roster and what you might be able to bring back, which is really Teo, Kalen, I think, and a handful of others, and when you look at everything else that you want to do over the summer?
I think the big part, once again, I probably sound like a stuck record talking about sustainability, but being able to get the club, get people on seats watching the games, is about having that good influence, having that good presence in the community. So the guys that we've got here have a big presence in the community. Kalen runs the basketball academy, works on junior programs also. Henry Wilkins is another one who's big in our community program, and the fans love him and the kids love him. And then Teo's also, you know, settled in this area and wants to be, you know, with Teo, it's an interesting one because when the Royals started their journey a season ago, he was on their list, you know, and I had to like speak to him and say, look, Teo, you don't play forever. And obviously the monies that they were talking weren't close to what we were paying. But Teo felt that sustainability and security, he felt he is safer in Surrey than leaving at that point in his career. So for Teo to do that was a big coup for me as a coach, to hold on to somebody of his experience and talent in order to build around from season to season. The rest of the guys that start coming in, you know, once again, we wanted to bring back Quincy Taylor, but they got to listen to their agents. And so Quincy's now ended up in Lithuania. I really liked what Willie Atwood brought, and I felt he showed what he was capable of towards the end of the season. So another season would be great for him. But he got offered 5 times the money to go play in Austria. So he ended up going there. Same thing with Anthony Elici, got a better offer in Spain. And Moroquinho just had a brilliant season, you know, playing in Europe, where he is MVP of the league that he is playing in. So I've always given guys an opportunity when they've had nowhere to go, Mark. And in the end, bigger things come around or more money, and they've had to leave. So the one difference this year is we've been really strict. We've been really clear on the players that sign for the entire journey and not come knock on the door a month in or 2 months in and say my agent's got me something better, because we feel that we owe it to our fans to make sure that people are staying with us and are loyal, as the fans are very loyal to us. So that's how, you know, the roster was built on people that want to be here. Basketball-wise, they're good players, but they're also willing to do their little bit in the community. And we all know that, you know, for BBL clubs to be successful, that human being that can be good on the basketball court and also good in the community is very important.
How much do you think it helps a team, and I got a coach like yourself this year, that you've got for a couple of weeks of BBL Cup games? It's going to be a few more weeks till the league actually starts. But, you know, for teams that don't have a long training camp, for teams that have a lot of new players, how much does it help that effectively you've got about 6 to 8 weeks really to be ready for the start of the league season while playing competitive games?
I love it, Mark. I think that the system that we've actually come up, that the BBL has come up with this year, the cup games are important, and like you said, it gives you an opportunity to find out who you are. But it's almost like a mini league before we get to the championship. And what's going to happen in all these games? I was speaking to Atiba Lions when we had the friendly game, and I said, you know what, Atiba, we're going to have to get a memo out to all the coaches, and we're going to have to agree that all of us are going to have to coach right until the last second, because in all our competitions, it's going to come down to head to head. Before we had the 3 games in the BBL championship, so whoever won 2 won that head to head. Whereas now you play each other twice, one at home and one away. Same thing within the cup. So if we had to play, say, for example, Bristol, we play Bristol, and we lose by 15 in the return leg, in order to get the head-to-head, we know we have to beat them by 16. So as coaches, somebody takes that last 3-point shot for the fans to go crazy, and we want to knock each other's heads off. We got to understand that because of how the league and the cups are set up, it's going to be even more competitive than it's ever been, which means that the players have to stand up and be counted. And if they can't perform in this cup competition, then coaches like myself and anybody else are going to be forced to make changes in time for the championship.
Which is it's going to pose interesting questions for teams that don't do well in the cup, because you've got BBL contracts with out clauses, etc. at this time of year. But I guess you can almost go through the cup, get halfway through it, and say, hold on a minute, I need to be ruthless right now, because I can bring someone in, have them integrated, and be ready for game 1 of the championship.
And that is so true. And that's the conversation I've had with my guys, and I've said, look, if we're winning, nobody's going to ask any questions. If we're winning, everybody's going to be safe. If we're not winning, there's going to be a lot of questions. So it's not about you as an individual, but as a team, we need to be winning. And and with the guys that we've brought in, it's for now in the preseason that we've had, it's been pretty solid. I've been pretty happy with what they've said, with the attitudes that I've had. I've done a lot of research in terms of their personalities. So it looks all good, but everybody is pretty very, very good when they obviously auditioning. So we'll see how long that lasts for.
Is that the toughest part as a coach, cutting a player, especially earlier in the season, when especially a rookie perhaps that's never had this before?
Oh, it's horrible, Mark. The perception of a basketball player is sometimes one of like, wow, he's a professional basketball player. He's been paid thousands and thousands and thousands. He's going to, if he loses his job, he's just going to get another job, But it's not that, guys get cut and then their careers end, especially for the imports. For the British guys, it's a little tough, a little easier because they stick around and they get given another opportunity. But there's so many American players that come out of Division 1, Division 2, NAIA schools, and I always tell guys that. I said, you got to understand this opportunity being given is amazing. I looked at almost like 150 plus point guards this season. It's crazy. So that's the worst part of this job, is sitting down with somebody and telling them that for now, their dream job has been taken away from them.
Let's talk about All-Stars basketball. This Sunday, Copper Box Arena, Surrey Scorchers, the defending champions. What was that like for you last year? I know it was the season, it was probably the highlight of the season, I guess, given the way that things went. But what was fun about that day?
Oh, like you said, Mark, that season was probably 3 seasons in one for me, with all the changes that we made. But that was probably the biggest highlight of it, is winning that piece of silverware. And also what was big is obviously the prize money makes a big difference in in helping your club in that word of sustainability. It was a brilliant day for us. I felt that we were going to push on from it. Unfortunately, we lost Jordan Williams straight after, who was MVP of the All-Star, and also we lost Josh Steele. But going into this weekend, I feel that it's once again an opportunity to do something special. Those pictures they live forever in people's households. The picture of Teo holding the trophy aloft, and the guy smiling. Nobody can take that away from us, and so it felt so good. I would be lying if I never said that it was important going into defending it this coming season. I really want to make sure that this weekend we go full out to try and go back to back.
Do you have your buzzer technique, your golden buzzer technique, your 5-point plays, all that kind of down pat? Will that be something strategizing the days before?
Mark, I was probably the worst coach at pressing that. I think I might have messed up once or twice. So, I think my strategy, which I can tell all the other coaches, is I'm just gonna go press it early. And if they, so if they are listening, I'm gonna go and press it straight away. So we're going to score early.
Well, we're looking forward to it again. You'll be able to join me and the Sky Sports team for All Stars this Sunday, 1 p.m. on Sky Sports. Creon, it's a delight to talk to you. Fascinating tales. We could talk forever, but look forward to watching you guys go for that All Stars title this weekend. And of course, good luck for the remainder of this season.
No, big thank you to you, Mark, and all that you do for British basketball and, keeping it out there. So hopefully it will be a good weekend for us. And thanks again for having me.
Look forward to it. That is it for this edition. You can subscribe to the MVP cast via your preferred podcast provider or get all the past episodes at our website at mvp247.com. We'll have another one very soon. But for now, from me, Mark Woods, it's goodbye.